Okay, good evening. Tazria-Metzora, Tavshin Pei. We're going to be discussing the beginning of Parsha's Tazria. And the very first, in the beginning of Parsha Tazria reads, this is Perek Beis, Pasuk Beis, chapter 12, verse 2. Daber b'nei Yisrael lemar, speak to the children of Israel, saying, Isha ki Tazria, a woman that produces seed, which means she conceives, v'yolda zachar, and she gives birth to a male. The Tam'ah Shabas Yamim should be impure for 7 days, as she is during the 7 days of need of her menstruation. So just for a quick introduction to what the beginning of the parsha is talking about, that as a woman gives birth, she automatically becomes impure, the same way a woman who menstruates is impure for 7 days following that. If a woman menstruates for 1 day, she's still going to be impure according to Torah law. She's impure for a total of 7 days. On day 7, once she stops bleeding, she can go to the mikveh. She's permissible to her husband. That's according to the Torah law. Nowadays, we practice further restrictions. Now, Rashi points out that if a woman were to give birth without bleeding, or she were to stop bleeding very shortly after giving birth, she would still be impure, meaning forbidden to her husband, like a nida, for those first 7 days. Following those 7 days, if she stopped bleeding, she went to the mikveh, and she became permissible to her husband. If she continues bleeding for the next 33 days, she's still permissible to her husband. She doesn't become a nida, or like a nida. She is impure regarding holy objects, like participating, eating in a carbon. That she's not allowed to do. But for the next 33 days, she is pure in the sense of she's bleeding and permissible to her husband. If she bleeds after that, then she goes back to the regular cycle of being a nida, even if it's blood from childbirth. For a boy, it goes for 7 days and 33 days. For a girl, 14 days and then 66 days. So that's what the parsha in the beginning talks about. But our focus is going to be on Rashi. Rashi on this pasuk quotes a medrash that reads, "Kashem sheyitzirasei shel adam achakol behemba chayav v'mas. Just as man's creation followed the animals, wild beasts, and birds in the creation of the world, so too his laws, man's laws, are explained after the laws of the animals." Last week's Parsha Shmini, were the laws of kosher and non-kosher animals. And following that, we have the laws regarding man, as we have in this week's Parsha. And we say that those laws of man follow the laws of animals, following the pattern of creation, that man was created following the creation of the animals. Now, what was bothering Rashi? Rashi cites this medrash. Rashi not just citing it because it's interesting. Something was bothering Rashi. And the answer would be that Rashi was bothered by the fact that the laws about kosher and non-kosher animals precede the laws here of man's birth. After all, it's not the laws of the animals per se. It's not about the animals. It's about our relationship to animals, what we can eat, what we can't eat. So that's our laws also. But the point is, Rashi's point would be that the laws that pertain to man's birth should precede the laws that pertain to what he's allowed to eat or what he's not allowed to eat. First you're born and then you eat. So the question is, why are we discussing the laws of kashrus, the laws of what a man may eat or not, before we talk about the law that applies to a person's birth? The answer is because the Torah is following the pattern. And again, just to clarify, as we just mentioned, when we talk about and we say that the laws of man follow the laws of animals, there's plenty of laws that pertain to man that preceded the animals. But we mean the laws of man, the laws that relate to the birth of a person. The laws that relate to the birth of a person, they follow the laws that relate to animals following the pattern of creation. Just like creation, Adam was created before man. So the laws of his creation follow after the laws that pertain to animals. So the question is, what's the point of that? What is the point of following this pattern? What's the Torah trying to impart to us with this? So Rashi is actually citing the end of the medrash. Let's take a look at the beginning of the Medrash. What thoughts precede in the Medrash precede these words at the end, what Rashi quotes to explain to us the pattern of the Torah, that it's following the pattern of creation. There's something the Medrash has more to say than this. And the commentary of Eitz Yosef in the Medrash tells us that the Medrash actually, before citing what Rashi cites, actually comes to explain why it is that way. Rashi tells us man was created after animals. Well, why was man created after animals? What's the reason for that? That's what the Medrash is going to be discussing. The Medrash first discusses why man was created after animals, and then the Medrash concludes, and therefore we find the laws pertaining to man's birth follows the laws that pertain to animals following the pattern of creation. But why was man created after animals? So the Medrash has a couple of explanations, and we're going to talk about two of them. Now, the Medrash cites the beginning of the Parsha, Isha ki Tazria, a woman who produces seed. Hadahu dechsiv. This is what David HaMelech in Tehillim was referring to when, this is what the book of Tehillim is referring to, dechsiv as it's written, Achar v'kedem tzartani. Literally translated, it means Achar, behind, v'kedem, and before or ahead, tzartani, you have fortified me. That is the shot. That's the basic interpretation in the context of what David HaMelech is saying in Tehillim. But the Medrash uses the word tzartani to actually here not to mean to fortify, but actually to be used in the form of tzartani, to form. So you're like an artist, you form something. So achar v'kedem tzartani, the Medrash is explaining, means behind and ahead or in front, tzartani, you have created me. So the first explanation to that, the Medrash cites, is from the sage of Yechanan. Amr of Yechanan, Mizacha Adam, if a person merits, Noichal Shnei Oilamos, he can inherit two worlds, Hazeh v'haba, this world and the next world. Haodei dechsiv, this is what the pasuk means when it says, Ochar v'kedem tzartani, back and ahead you have created me. In this context, Ochar here means like after or later. That's referring to Eilam Haba, the world to come that comes later. But Kedem here would mean a explanation, Kodem, meaning before. So after the afterlife and the life before the afterlife, you have Tzartani, you have created for me. Meaning if a person lives the kind of life, the proper way of living life, that person is able to inherit, to have both this world and the next. And therefore, according to this, man is created after everything to say that if you merit, when you merit and you live the kind of life, you for sure get Olam Haba, you for sure get the world to come, but you'll also get from before. You'll also get everything before. The whole world from before will be yours. This world, Olam Hazeh, this world will be yours. So therefore, man is created afterwards to say everything until now can be yours if you live the right kind of life. Now, when we say a person can be Noichel Shnei Oilamos, a person can inherit both worlds, typically that kind of an expression means a person will have this world. The next means he'll have it good in this world and good in the next world, which could be interpreted to mean he'll be wealthy in this world and wealthy in the next world. And the commentary of Eitz Yosef in the Medrash points out that not everybody that's righteous is wealthy. There have been people who are righteous and wealthy, but not everybody has been. So what does it mean, Noichel Shnei Oilamos? If a person merits, he can inherit both worlds. And the answer that he brings in his other commentary, in the Medrash Anaf Yosef, he says it means is that clearly we know that there are two parts of us. We have our guf, our body, our neshama, our soul. The guf, the body, is attracted to certain types of pleasures. And the neshama, the soul, is attracted to more spiritual things. And they seemingly are pulling man in different directions. They're diametrically opposed. However, what the Medrash is saying is that if you marry, if you live the right kind of life, and that's the life that will lead you to Eilam Haba, that will lead you to the life that the neshama desires, you'll have both worlds. You'll be satisfied and happy in this world also. Your physical self can be satisfied and happy with this world if you dedicate it to the service of the neshama. There is a way of being able to bring both pleasures together. There's a way of having the neshama happy by being involved in spiritual pursuits and Torah pursuits. And when a person uses their physicality for the purpose of serving the neshama, for the purpose of fulfilling Torah, they dedicate their physicality to that, then they'll be able to inherit this world also. They'll have a happy and satisfied and pleasurable life. And therefore, the two things can work together. If a person merits, he can merit both. He'll have a good life, a pleasurable life, a satisfied life in this world, and he'll have Olam Haba. So that's the first explanation of why man is created after everything, to say that it's possible that, again, if he lives the right life, he could have Achar v'Kedem. He could have both. He could have the world that's after the afterlife, and he could have the world that precedes it. And man was created after the world to say, you can have, not just can you have the world to come, you can have everything that precedes it. You can have this whole world if you live the right kind of life and be satisfied with it, and thus be satisfied and happy with everything in your physical life. So that's one explanation. Another explanation that's given, again, to this pasuk of Achar v'Kedem Tzartani, is Amar Rabbi Elazar, the sage of Elazar said, Achar, which in this case means back, Zeh Yom Rishon. This again is referring to the first day of creation. V'Kedem, and in front, ahead, Zeh Yom Achron. This is the last day of creation. And therefore, the pasuk would be saying, the first day and the last day you created me. That means, following Al Dai to Rabbi Elazar, according to Rabbi Elazar, this means, that which the Torah says, that the earth sprout forth a living soul according to its kind. Nefesh chaya, a living soul, zuruche shel adam harishon. That's referring to the spirit of the first man. And when it says that, and when it says, so that's Achar, back. The first day, what went back, the first day, or what went back, what was earlier, was the creation of the soul of Adam Harishon, of the first man, Kedem, and then when it says ahead is referring to the last day, the sixth day of creation, when man's physical body was created. Now, so that's what the pasuk is saying. The man's neshama, the neshama of first man, which was the first neshama of all souls, that was actually created first, and then man's physical body was created after that. So you got two parts of man, the body and the soul. The neshama, the soul, was actually created before man's body. And on this, the Medrash comments, what's the point of that? What's the point of having his soul be created first and then his body last? If a person merits, means he lives the proper life, we say to him, you preceded everything else, all the other living creatures in the world, you were first. The imlav, but if you don't merit, you know what preceded you? A mosquito preceded you. A worm preceded you. That's the point. Man was created after, his physical body was created after. We have his neshama being created first, his physical body being created after all the animals, for the purpose of telling him that your physical, from the point of your physicality, you can be looked upon less than a mosquito. The mosquito was created before your physical body was created before you. But your neshama, your soul, was created before all those other things. So if you live by your neshama, if you live by your soul, then we say to you, hey, look, you're before everything. You're the most important thing. However, if you follow your body, you follow your physical body, then we say to you, there are even smaller, teeny creatures that preceded your physical body. They physically preceded you. So that is that other explanation as to why man was created after. His physical body was created after, to say that if he follows his physicality, if he only follows the physical aspect of his life, then he was born after the other physical creatures, and he's less important than them. Now we have to understand that. What does that mean? That the physical man, again, if he follows his physicality, he's we say to you, a mosquito preceded you. I mean, the physical man is a lot stronger than a mosquito. He can accomplish a lot more than a mosquito. He has more hope than a mosquito. So what exactly does it mean when we say to him, the mosquito preceded you? And the answer that's given is that the measuring stick here is the fulfillment of what you were created for. That's the measuring stick here. Have you fulfilled your purpose of being for being created? The mosquito doesn't have too many challenges. It was created to be. And when it is, it fulfills its purpose. Man, of course, has a much greater challenge in life than a mosquito. But at the end of the day, if he doesn't meet the challenge, then he failed fulfilling his purpose in life. And from that aspect, he is less than a mosquito. On the other hand, if he fulfills his purpose, then we say, look, you preceded everything. You're greater than everything. You're the most important thing. You are the pinnacle of creation. Because that's what happens when you follow your neshama. And the neshama was created before everything. So the measuring stick here is, have you fulfilled your purpose? If you fulfilled your purpose, great. If you didn't fulfill your purpose, then you're less than a mosquito. The mosquito fulfilled its purpose, and at the end you did. And then after the Medrash explains what is the reason man was created after his physical body was created after the animals, then the Medrash says, just as he was formed, he was created after the animals, so too the laws of his birth follow the laws that pertain to animals. Okay. So we still need to explain, though, what's the point of this? What is the point of his laws following the laws of the pattern of creation? But I'd also like to point out that if we are following the pattern of creation, then that means that the laws being mentioned in this week's Parsha, which we say, the laws of his birth follow the laws of animals, that means that the beginning of this week's Parsha is following the pattern of the negative pattern. The pattern of man born after animals, in which we say to him, the mosquito preceded you. That's when man lives a negative life. Why is this week's Parsha, where no one did anything wrong, he was just born, why is that following the negative pattern of creation? Let's just focus on the explanation that was given about that if he doesn't merit, we say to him, the mosquito preceded you. Well, if that's the pattern, if the man created after the animal is the lesson of the mosquito preceded you, then that means our Parsha that's following that pattern is working within that pattern of a man following his physicality, where we say he's not as worthy as a mosquito. Why is this week's Parsha, the law of this week's Parsha, following the negative pattern? And perhaps the answer is that we have in the beginning of the Parsha a law of tumah, a law of ritual impurity, a law of ritual impurity that follows a baby's birth. What is the explanation? Why, after a baby is born, why does ritual impurity set in? We know ritual impurity sets in when a person dies. There are other causes of ritual impurity. Why does birth create impurity? So, to make a long story short, we'll explain this in a maybe in a simplistic way, but we'll just give an explanation. And that is that whenever there is a void of kedusha, whenever kedusha departs and leaves a void, that is where tumah, impurity, sets in. Where kedusha once was and now departed, that void is filled by tumah, by ritual impurity. A woman was carrying a life. A woman was in the process of forming a life. There was her life, and she was carrying another life. Once the baby is born, that other life leaves her. She doesn't have that other life within her anymore. And because that life that she was carrying and creating left her, that is now creates a void of kedusha. There was a baby in there, a baby with a neshama, a holy being. It was part of her. Now it left her. That automatically has created a void that once was filled by that was once filled by kedusha. The kedusha has left. There's a void. Tuma sets in. Never did anything wrong. Nothing wrong. Never did anything wrong. But the point is that there is a void of kedusha that has been created, and tuma sets in. That is an expression of the negativity of physicality. Physicality is something where you can have a void of kedusha. The neshama life isn't void of kedusha. It's the physical life that's void of kedusha. And it's only within physicality, it's only within the physical dimension of man's existence that you can have such a thing as a void of kedusha, of losing kedusha. And therefore, what we have here is that the reason why this week's Parsha follows that pattern of man following his physicality is because the same way when a baby is born, because it's in a physical being, it's in the physical dimension, there's that creation of a void of sanctity. So too, man has the ability to void himself of sanctity if he doesn't live the right kind of life. The pattern of man following the animals, which means that you're not living a holy life. You're living just a mere physical life. And to that we say to you, well, a mosquito preceded you. It's better than you. It's more worthy than you. It fulfills its purpose more than you do. That is expressed, not in the sense of doing something wrong, but that's expressed again in the aspect of our physicality being void of, having the possibility of being void of kedusha. When the baby leaves, it creates a void of kedusha. That's only possible because in the physical realm, you can have a void of kedusha. You can lose kedusha, and you can lose sanctity. And that's exactly what happens when a person follows their physicality. They're voiding themselves of kedusha. They're having kedusha sanctity depart from them. And that's when we say to them, well, that's the pattern of creation that says you're less than a mosquito. So let's put this all together. And we put it all together now. The Medrash is telling us the Medrash at the end tells us the following. The Medrash and Rashi quotes tells us the following. The Torah taught us the laws regarding a person's birth after the laws of animals because it's following the pattern of creation. The reason creation was done in such an order is we're going to follow the explanation for the lesson of the mosquito, that mosquito has fulfilled its purpose more than you have. So therefore, now when you learn this Parsha and you see this pattern should remind you of this lesson. Why is the creation of man, why is this laws pertaining to creation of man following the laws that talks about the animals we can eat and not eat? It's because we're following the pattern of creation. Here is where the Torah wants us to remember that. Now, why here, of all places, when we talk about childbirth, does the Torah want us to remember this? The answer is because the mitzvah the Torah is giving us now portrays this lesson of the mosquito preceding you. It portrays it very well. Because as soon as a physical person is born, they immediately create a void of kedusha. And that's the potential of the physical dimension of our lives. We were created after the mosquito to tell us that if we follow physicality and we devoid our lives of kedusha, of sanctity, we're less worthy than a mosquito. And that is going to be, and we're going to be reminded of that in this Parsha that has immediately upon man's birth a loss of kedusha. Tuma sets in. That in itself is telling us, that in itself is showing us the fact that it happens immediately upon a person's creation. That in itself is reminding us of the potential of the physical dimension of our lives. As soon as a person is born, as soon as his physicality comes into being, what happens? There's a void of kedusha. He creates tuma. That in itself tells us that the physical dimension of our lives has the possibility of being void of kedusha. And it's there where the Torah wants us to think about that and to think about the order of the mitzvahs being here to tell us, yeah, as soon as you're born, you're void of kedusha, because the physical dimension of life is a life that can become void of kedusha, as we find in the creation, the pattern of creation of the world, that man's physical dimension came after the animals to say, if you follow a life of physicality, then you're less than the animals. So it all comes together. You should remember this lesson when you see the mitzvah that right upon man's creation physically, Tuma sets in because there's a void of Kedusha. That mitzvah that tells us as soon as man's physicality comes to creation, there is a void of Kedusha. That's where you should remember the lesson of man following the animals. Because when man devoids himself of Kedusha, he's less important than the animals. And therefore, at the end, it's really it's up to us to decide what kind of life are we going to live. Are we going to live a life according to the dimension of ourselves that preceded creation, the life of the neshama, or are we going to follow the path, the man, the physical man who's created after animals, in which we say you haven't fulfilled your purpose in life and you're less worthy than even a mosquito? That is perhaps what lies in this first Rashi in the Parsha, about that the Torah's laws are patterned after man's creation after animals. Okay, now Pasuk Gimel reads, Perek Yebei's Pasuk Gimel reads, Vayayim Hashmini Yimol Basar Or Lasai. On day 8, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Now, we already know the mitzvah of bris milah, circumcision, back from Bereshis. That's where we get the mitzvah. And therefore, the commentaries talk about why does the Torah now interject the mitzvah of bris milah again. So the commentary of Yosef explains in the following way, very interesting explanation. And that is that he says, let's look back at the beginning of the Parsha, where it says, Isha ki Tazria, the Yolda Zahar, a woman who will produce seed and give birth to a male. So the Medrash is bothered as to why the Torah has to even mention the words Isha ki Tazria, a woman who will produce seed. The point is, after she gives birth, there is impurity. So all the Torah has to say is, a woman who gives birth to a boy, she has these laws of impurity, and to a girl, she's got those different laws. She has a lengthier time of impurity. Why does the Torah have to include the words Isha ki Tazria, a woman who produces seed? And because of that, the Medrash launches into a whole discussion about the miracle of childbirth, the miracle of a development of a child, of a baby, from the very beginning, from the seed until the baby is born. The Medrash says, we give to Hashem just a seed, a drop, and from that comes this wondrous creature, this wondrous, beautiful baby. The Medrash talks about how a woman is erect, but God has created her in a way that the baby doesn't fall out. A baby is living in fluid that is warm, that is hot, that we say if a human being would be in that, the Medrash says a person would be in that kind of temperature, they die, and the baby survives. And then eventually the baby forms, and there's a very meticulous pattern and form to a child. Everything is calculated, why everything is the way that it is. Childbirth itself is a tremendous miracle. And the Medrash brings all this in, says the Ber Yosef. And this is how the Medrash explains why the Torah begins with Isha ki Tazria, a woman who produces seed. Because the Torah is alluding, says the Medrash, to the idea that when a child is born, think back to the beginning. Think back to its original formation. Think back to all the wondrous miracles and all the wondrous things that God does to create this beautiful child. Isha ki Tazria v'yolda. Don't just think about the birth. Think back. Once the child is birthed, think back to the beginning and contemplate the wondrous miracles of wonder and the wondrous creation that God produces when a child is born. So says the Ber Yosef that there's a famous Medrash that there was a Roman general named Turnus Rufus, And he had many philosophical discussions with the great Rabbi Akiva. He's actually called Turnus Rufus HaRasha, the evil Turnus Rufus. But he was interested in engaging Rabbi Akiva in philosophical discussions. Not a contradiction to be evil and still be involved in philosophy. And so he asked him a question. And his question was, if God wants man to be circumcised, then why wasn't he born that way? God is creating an imperfect creature. And he wants us to perfect it. Why didn't he just create it perfect to begin with? Why didn't he create it all ready, so to speak, to begin with? Rabbi Akiva answered him, because God has given us the mitzvahs by which to purify ourselves. Which means that it's true. God has created a beautiful creation. It's called the child. And yes, he's left something for us to finish. Why? Because through our actions in his service, we purify ourselves. We sanctify ourselves. That's why he left it imperfect. That's why he left it for us to finish. So the Rebbe Yosef suggests that this is why the Torah is interjecting bris milah here in this parsha. Because as we said, the parsha begins, Isha ki Tazria-Metzora zachar. A woman who produces seed and gives birth to a male. And the Medrash says, you're supposed to contemplate the creation of a child from beginning to end and appreciate the wondrous creation and the beautiful creation that it is. Well, if it's so wondrous and beautiful, then why do we have bris milah, as Turnus Rufus asked? By interjecting bris milah here, we first have contemplated the wondrous creation of a person, and then we're reminded of bris milah. And we're supposed to say to ourselves, if the creation of man, of a person, of a child is so wondrous, and it's so beautiful, and so perfect, and it's so meticulously calculated, then why wasn't he born complete? Let him be born circumcised. And the answer, and by putting these two things together and asking that question, then we come to the answer that Rabbi Akiva gave, which is the fact that God gave us the ability, or the merit, the opportunity, the privilege to finish the child because our actions purify us. So by interjecting bris milah here in the parsha, it's putting the contemplation of the wondrous creation of a child together with bris milah to ask that question. If the creation of a child is so wondrous and beautiful, why is the child born imperfect? And by putting them together and making us ask that question, we'll now come to the answer of Rabbi Akiva. And the answer was because Hashem gave us the mitzvahs by which to purify ourselves. The actions that we do, the actions that Hashem gives us, are for the purpose of our benefit, of our elevation. Thank you all for listening. Have a good night.